have now the great pleasure to introduce Nick Laessing, and his manifesto, The Place of the Material World in the Universe, is that of an exquisitely beautiful precipitate of varied cloudwork in the universal ether. Nick Laessing has already actually performed here in the Serpentine Frank Gehry Pavilion earlier this summer. It was a performance in collaboration with Athanasios Arganios, who is actually going to also do his manifesto later at 5:40. Nick Laessing is always searching for answers to unproven scientific phenomena with investigations and constructions that revisit utopian possibilities. He studied in Düsseldorf at the Academy and then postgraduate at the Royal Academy in London and lives now in Berlin. His many exhibitions include an exhibition in Noisy-le-Sec, as well as the Künstlerhaus Bethanien, as well as the Herzliya Museum of Contemporary Art in Israel. A very warm welcome to Nick Laessing.
Now, we've been brainwashed to believe that outer space is empty. There's nothing there. I'm talking to John Bedini about this today. John, what's wrong with this theory?
Well, what's wrong with the theory is that we're surrounded by an electrical gas which we can tap into if we know how to utilize it. And during my many years of research, I've come to a very strange conclusion that one must have something like a trigger to tap this. And it's the same thing that Nikola Tesla said all along, that we must have these little impulses, and by utilizing these little impulses, we can tap or cause the vacuum energy to enter our system, and then we can capture that. And of course, ever since the work in '84 with the first machine that was shown at the Tesla Symposium, which was the Watson machine, well, and of course, that machine was successfully demonstrated at 5 kilovolts on stage. And after that, very strange thing started to happen. James Watson disappeared after 2 weeks. Nobody could find him. It wasn't until later years that we all discovered that James Watson had to take the buyout to protect his family. On the other hand, I was forced into seclusion buying gasoline, which is what everybody does. So, I never gave up my work developing what I call the monopole energizer, which is on all the groups today. And what I wanted to do was bring forth a very small invention that showed exactly the type of energy we were capturing. And I wanted it to be as simple as possible so that everybody working with it can grasp it and understand that it's not the so-called electron current that's actually making the system work. Of course, in the front end of the machine here, we're talking about a normal circuit which can be measured conventionally and normally. And in the back end of the machine, we're talking about the Tesla system, which is impulse currents, the same thing Tesla was going to do in the 1800s to bring about free energy. Front end refers to the circuitry from and including the power supply or powering battery, through and including the rotor and the coil, just here. Back end refers to the circuitry that processes the impulses that comprise the fast rise time trigger signal, transistor, diodes, etc., as well as the conductors carrying the trigger signal to a storage battery or storage capacitor. What I want everybody to understand about free energy is that, well, free energy might be misrepresented in a way, because you must supply something to get something out of it. Are you following me?
Yeah, of course.
Well, Tesla was going to use Niagara Falls to power his magnifying transmitter, but the powers that be said, why should we allow this to happen when we can't measure it, we can't meter it, we can't make anybody pay for it? So the brakes were put on Tesla, and he was discredited in all the books shortly after that. So what we have here is, if we were to utilize Tesla's system, we were to trigger it, a very strange effect would occur. We could use these impulse currents, and they would go into the ground, and they would start to couple. Their vectors would start to couple. And you, by putting up a small antenna or a coil that's in resonance with this transmitter, you could light your entire house from the system without paying for a thing. This is what I meant by saying the free energy has been misrepresented. Something has to provide the trigger signal that is necessary to trigger it out.
But before we do that, there are a few other things I want to discuss. So we get to dipoles and how they pertain to your monopole system. Can we do that first?
Yeah.
So All right then. In 1957, doctors Li and Yang won the Nobel Prize for the work on broken symmetry, which caused a revolution in physics. Could you tell us a little bit about broken symmetry, please?
Well, broken symmetry, in my view, and in my system, I'm going to relate this to my own work, right? Is when you have an imbalance in the system. What causes this to happen is an abrupt change. In other words, an abrupt change in, say, the voltage, very quickly. When this abrupt change occurs, we get a new form of energy that's sucked up from the broken symmetry, and that new form of energy is what we tap. We have to capture that somehow, and so we do that by the way that we cause these impulses. Now, this goes for anything like a lightning bolt, for example, that can cause an abrupt change, and then the symmetry is broken. And what you have after that is you have a coupling of all these different vectors. And if you're smart enough to get that energy, you can capture it, and it's what we term vacuum energy.
Well, what are dipoles then?
Well, one example of dipole is a storage battery, which has a plus and a minus pole. In other words, a dipole is something that has two poles, a positive and a negative. And when we use a storage battery, we form a loop. And that loop connects one pole around and returns the energy to the other pole of the dipole. And of course, if you keep doing this, if you keep going around and around in this loop, what happens is that you kill the dipole. We don't want to kill the dipole. We want the dipole always to stand in a voltage potential. That is the dipole. So out there throughout the whole universe are all these dipoles, and what we want to do is tap them without killing them. We want to keep their voltage potential as if they're not doing any work. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. So what we do is we take a little bit, but we shut it off before the current can get all the way around the loop. And by doing that, we prolong the dipole, but at the same time, we're capturing energy from it. And our circuits have to be fast enough, and they have to be switched correctly to do this. There are dipoles in everything, I mean, right down to water, down to whatever we're doing. We want to keep the dipole's potential strong. We don't want to force the dipole to collapse upon itself, because when the potential between the two poles falls to zero, it's not a dipole any longer. We're out of energy.
Because it seems a dipole is what is generating the energy?
Yes, because space is completely filled with energy.
And dipoles?
Yes.
So, John, how does one go into the energy of this dipole and tap the non-equilibrium steady-state electromagnetic flow of energy and not mess up the dipole?
Oh, okay, let's get into this a little bit. We accomplish this by the use of what we call a trigger signal. It's on and it's off really quick. It's like a little hammer. This is what's happening here. As long as you keep tapping this thing, you can capture the resonance. If you keep tapping and tapping and tapping and tapping and tapping. And so what we created was an unbalanced system in the front. We started with something that's known to everybody in the art, a coil. We know that the coil is in perfect symmetry to start out with. Now I'll explain how we break the symmetry using this concept by Li and Yang. We add an impulse to the coil, but as soon as we add the impulse, we shut it off. This causes what you could term a hammer blow to the coil. It's this little business with the copper and the brass rods just here. That's the little man hammering away. Now, we know what a coil is. It's a pretty steady electromagnet when there is a steady current. The coil acts as an electromagnet, and its two magnetic poles are in balance, one on the top and one on the bottom.
So what's current get to do with energy then?
Oh, absolutely nothing. We want no current at all, because anytime we allow current to flow through the whole system, we are killing the dipole. We don't want to kill that dipole.
Right.
We want to make the broken symmetry possible through a gating process. I'll explain it with an analogy. It's as if a little guy is standing there with his hammer. The little guy with the hammer is the potential. He's the dipole. We take a little bit of energy from the dipole to swing a gigantic hammer blow at the coil. This causes the coil's poles to vary between maximum electromagnetic flux and no magnetic flux. The 0 point that's in the center is like a window. We want to open and close the window. Opening and closing the window forms a pump for 0 point energy. Then when the 0 point energy enters the window, we tap a little bit off of it. That's the reason for the secondary or storage battery. We don't want to force any current into the storage battery. Remember, the storage battery is a dipole with a lattice network of atoms and molecules inside. It's a network that can absorb this energy, and that's why it's called a storage battery. So we don't have to charge storage batteries with tremendous current, as the monopole system proves. Instead, we use the front battery to cause this window to open and close in a pumping action. We take some of that pumping action on an output and send it to the secondary battery. So what the machine has is a standard front end working in standard conventional physics. But we break up the standard conventional physics by causing it to pulse with a unidirectional pulse. We make a pulse system by using a nonlinear front. You won't find any South Pole magnets on this machine. You'll only find North Pole magnets. Using only one pole, we make the machine do two things. First, the machine can put out mechanical output. Second, by pumping the window open and closed, the machine triggers the zero-point energy. Then we suck the energy out.
So we leave the dipole in static configuration with no current flowing through it, and that will radiate energy forever?
Right, because you see, when we add any current to the system, the radiant energy goes away. The vacuum energy disappears. It's no longer there.
So if we do this, it becomes a perpetual energy generator?
Absolutely. Once the energy is converted into a form that's usable, you're absolutely correct. It could become perpetual if the energy is transformed correctly by transforming it from one source to another source. Charging a capacitor with the energy transforms it into the kind of energy that we know, real electromagnetic energy. When we discharge this capacitor, it has the current and it has the voltage.
Now, John, I want to get into what you have decided to do in putting your information online and what that means and why you did it.
Well, I always follow my own mind that everybody should know what energy is. Everybody should have this knowledge. If they need energy, they should be able to get energy for themselves. It shouldn't be controlled. So what I did was in 1984, I published that first little book, and of course, Jim Watson built that machine from that book, and well, they sort of suppressed that. And Jim Watson was carried off into a foreign land, and of course, they told me to buy gasoline, and I did. But I worked on building something that everybody could build. So what I did when I got this thing to work was to immediately publish the information. I put it on the net. The net was just getting started at the time, so everything that I worked on and everything that I did, I posted to the internet because I felt, why should this be suppressed? People are either going to do it or they're not going to do it. And of course they did. All kinds of groups were started and people started building these machines. And as I said, they're still continuing to this day. Out of all this, you know, we're going to have energy. Free energy from this one day.
Now, John, where are you today? And what are you up to right now?
Well, I'm into making sure that the various groups are running correctly. And I'm into giving out as much information as I can on the systems that we're building. And we're also, as you know, we're a public company, and we build chargers. We build battery chargers that use portions of this waveform and energy in the charging systems. But we limit that in that we want to supply this energy to the battery. So let's say we have an electric vehicle, and the electric vehicle is getting 20 miles. We want to double that to 40 miles, so we allow the machine to double your mileage each time. So in other words, when you charge your car, instead of giving you the 20 miles that you normally used to get, now you get 40 miles. Of course, the better the system, the more radiant energy you put in with our chargers. Why? The more you'll see these gains in the battery. That's what we're working on right now.
So, friends, let me suggest that you go to 21stcenturyradio.com, click on John Bedini's name, and start educating yourself.
Absolutely.
I mean, John, what would you suggest that some of these individuals who are savvy about batteries and that type of thing make their own attempt at building these?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody should experiment for themselves. We don't learn unless we experiment with something.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.